That said, our primary purpose is to entertain, and where we can entertain responsibly, obviously we try to do that. We try to have a positive impact on the world. But the first thing we need to do is entertain.
No one expected Disney's latest remake of a beloved classic to vanish from theaters so abruptly, yet that's exactly what happened. One day, screens were showing glossy promos of a bold reimagining of Snow White. The next, the film had quietly disappeared from America's largest theater chain. This meltdown triggered a turn of events that has become part of Hollywood legend. It started with the usual buzz that accompanies any big-budget Disney production. Previews promised an exciting update to a timeless tale. The cast featured emerging star Rachel Zegler alongside the seasoned celebrity Gal Gadot. On paper, it seemed like a guaranteed success. The old Disney magic and the thrill of a modern spin. Supporters were ready to fall in love all over again. But behind the scenes, rumors started leaking about major plot changes and contemporary twists designed to make the story more relatable. Instead of an innocent princess story, fans learned of new subplots, new motivations, and the removal of key elements that made the 1937 classic so enchanting.
Yeah, I have a clip of it.
Oh, okay, great.
Her being a
Okay.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That laugh.
That is
not going to be
yeah.
saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
it?
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
It just takes a beloved movie and makes it much more boring and much less realistic. The movie is really, really bad.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
So we didn't do that this time.
In every way that the movie differed from the beloved 1937 original, it was worse. So from the casting to the class politics, the politics, the regime politics, and so I've got some bona fides here on being fair. The movie was absolutely terrible.
Some changes felt minor, but other differences were massive, completely rewriting character arcs or erasing that nostalgic sense of wonder. Soon, Disney's social media pages lit up with heated debates. In the early stages, however, the studio seemed confident. Disney had delivered successful live-action remakes before, from Beauty and the Beast to Aladdin. Each time, the formula looked simple. Announce a reinterpretation of a beloved film, dazzle folks with brilliant marketing, then watch the box office numbers climb. Industry analysts expected a similar performance this time around. In fact, theater chains like AMC were initially thrilled to feature Snow White on multiple screens, anticipating steady attendance for weeks. Rachel Zegler's star also seemed to be on the rise. She had a powerful voice, natural charisma, and an unflinching knack for honesty in interviews. Many saw her as part of a new wave of performers who weren't afraid to speak from the heart. Add to that Gal Gadot's well-established reputation, and you had a duo that spanned different corners of Hollywood stardom. But leaked footage and insider gossip hinted that the film deviated sharply from the classic storyline. Some said it barely resembled the fairy tale at all, and that it was stuffed with heavy-handed social commentary and failed at preserving the magic of the original.
It basically, this movie was like you took the original Snow White and just put everything through this filter of liberalism. It wasn't through a filter of Japanese anime, it was through a filter of liberalism. Everything about it was liberal.
There were rumors of tense disagreements on set, but Disney tried to keep a lid on unverified chatter. But the internet thrives on speculation, and more silence the studio maintained, the more fans assumed the worst.
There was an in-depth piece, like a behind-the-scenes piece, talking about how they've been in a full meltdown about this girl for a couple of years now.
While the production chugged along, a wave of fan backlash was steadily building online. Dissatisfied audience members latched onto every detail they could find. Photos of changes to the dwarfs, rumored lines of dialogue that disparaged the original story, or remarks from the new lead that seemed dismissive of tradition. The film hadn't even premiered, but the collective mood was turning sour. Hashtags like "Not My Snow White" trended for days as people questioned their loyalty. Some believed the changes were a needed evolution. Others saw it as a total betrayal of the magic of the 1937 film. Disney tried highlighting the positives, posting sneak peeks of vibrant sets and heartfelt behind-the-scenes interviews. Still, for every excited comment, there were more accusing the studio of disrespect. As the premiere drew closer, the negativity snowballed. That's where Rachel Zegler stepped in. In an ideal world, a charismatic lead can quell doubts by radiating warmth and confidence in interviews. Yet, during talk show chats, red carpet meet and greets, and social media updates, Zegler seemed unafraid to critique the original film's outdated elements. For longtime Disney loyalists, her comments came across as condescending, as if telling them their childhood memories were silly or regressive. It didn't help that hints of friction between Zegler and Gal Gadot began swirling around the media. Insiders claimed the two had creative differences over how the story should be told. Others speculated that the friction was more about personal and political beliefs. With everything already tense, fans jumped at each new rumor. Disney found itself in unfamiliar territory, scrambling to contain speculation that threatened to overshadow the movie itself. Meanwhile, Zegler refused to tone down her opinions. She posted freely on social media, endorsing progressive viewpoints about representation and inclusivity.
Our rights are on the line, folks.
The right to buy Cosby
rights.
sweaters?
Come on.
That's the face
Go
of a
vote blue.
serial killer.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
You don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced,
He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry. And so it was like
Those people.
very much this, yes. It
Yeah,
was this
The people that we
awakening
need
of,
to educate, the people that we need to love into awareness.
love them in the right direction.
We need to no, you don't need, it's not your job. Your job is to entertain. You are paid to entertain.
And longtime devotees of the classic felt singled out, as though their nostalgia was being labeled outdated. People who had grown up dreaming about Snow White and the magical dwarfs suddenly felt they were being told that love stories and fairy tale romances were old-fashioned. Disney tried scheduling friendlier interviews, yet an air of defensiveness lingered. By the time the press tour launched in full, the atmosphere around Snow White was already tense. Then came the day that changed everything. Disney organized an appearance for Rachel Zegler on The View, where she could charm audiences and pivot the media back toward positivity. Viewers expected a playful discussion about the movie's songs or the updated look of the movie. Instead, they got the scandal that nearly everyone in Hollywood is still talking about. Zegler seemed determined to steer the conversation away from the usual promotional script. She made pointed remarks about politics, not just the film. At first, the hosts, veterans like Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar, tried to work with her, but Zegler continued, openly criticizing what she called outmoded thinking in certain classic Disney narratives. Viewers at home could sense the rising awkwardness as she continued to imply that fans who clung to the old Snow White just weren't ready for progress. The hosts tried changing the subject, asking about her experiences filming with Gal Gadot, but Zegler wasn't finished. She made statements that many interpreted as direct insults aimed at hardcore fans. The meltdown spiraled so quickly that it left the entire panel flustered. The cameras captured only fragments of the chaos, but that was enough. By the day's end, rumors spread that security had escorted Zegler out, and speculation painted an unflattering picture of on-set chaos. Any chance of a graceful recovery vanished. Even neutral fans found it jarring, and more conservative viewers, who'd once been merely skeptical, now seemed downright hostile toward the film. Some started calling Rachel Zegler box office poison. By the time Snow White finally hit theaters, the damage was done. Ticket sales came in below even the most modest projections.
But the primary suffering is being sent in by my company to watch a children's movie as a single man, like 2 p.m. on a Thursday. That was the first part that was a little bit weird, but I was basically the only person in the theater. Very few people wanted to see this. Even the little kids who like Disney movies, even they don't seem to be turning up in droves for the movie because the movie is really, really bad.
Critics who had seen early screenings tore into the adaptation, claiming it lacked the charm and heart of the original. Online reviews were merciless. The meltdown overshadowed every aspect of the premiere. When people talked about Snow White, it was less about the storyline and more about Rachel Zegler's dramatic statements. AMC, the country's largest theater chain, had reserved ample showtimes for what they anticipated would be a great run. But as day after day passed with small crowds, AMC began quietly dropping extra screenings. Some locations found that entire rows remained empty. Word got around that audiences were actively avoiding the movie. It reached a point where local theater managers openly acknowledged that continuing to show Snow White was a losing proposition. AMC announced it would remove the film from all its locations. Disney's name alone usually secures a substantial window in theaters, even for underperforming titles. But this meltdown had reached such a fever pitch that AMC saw no upside in keeping the film around. One day it was there, the next it was. gone. People flooded social media with reactions ranging from good riddance to genuine shock that a Disney property had tanked so dramatically. Podcaster Joe Rogan dedicated a lengthy segment to dissecting the meltdown, the behind-the-scenes rumors, and Disney's inability to recover once the controversy started. He called it a watershed moment, pointing out that brand loyalty and marketing might no longer be enough to salvage a film if the public narrative turns sour. In the age of relentless social media feedback, even Disney's formidable promotional engine couldn't contain the crisis. Some voices pointed fingers at Rachel. Zegler, saying her on-air meltdown and combative stance toward the original story alienated a core audience. Others insisted Disney itself was to blame for trying to modernize a classic too aggressively.
Snow White is generally understood to be a very, very white person. And in this case, they decided, nope, no, that doesn't make any sense. So I don't think we're allowed to say that, right? I was referring to the movie as sand beige. It's no really knock on her. If you did the autobiography of Malcolm X, would you cast Tom Hanks? If you remade Moana, would you cast a little Irish guy? No, you wouldn't. So that was off the top.
It is not racist to suggest that a character who is described in the original as skin white as snow, that is literally how the character is described in the original, that's a character description in the same way that, as you mentioned, in Moana, this bizarre fixation with race shifting everything, but only in one direction by Disney, obviously is quite strange.
A few defenders argued that Zegler was simply expressing a progressive viewpoint. Yet, the box office numbers told a brutal story, and companies tend to follow the money. Gal Gadot, once seen as a stabilizing factor, largely vanished from promotional appearances. Rumors flew that she disagreed with Zegler's approach, but didn't want to publicly undermine a coworker. Meanwhile, Disney's executives found themselves in crisis mode. Bob Iger had to reckon with a debacle that seemed to unravel every carefully constructed PR tactic the studio tried. If the meltdown had been more contained, it might have been salvageable, but going off script on live television, then doubling down under pressure, that was a different mess. With AMC yanking the film, everyone wondered if other chains would follow suit. Smaller theaters had already downsized showings of Snow White. Though not every chain made a sweeping announcement like AMC, the damage was undeniably widespread. The meltdown dominated all conversations about the film, overshadowing everything else. People simply weren't talking about the creative details anymore. They were talking about how it had all gone horribly wrong. In recent years, the studio's live-action remakes often raked in cash, even if reviews were mixed. Perhaps that track record has ended. Audiences might have swallowed moderate changes, but when the star of the film publicly dismissed the original's core elements, it tested the limits of their patience. The fiasco also sparked debates about corporate control versus an actor's freedom of speech. Joe Rogan believed the meltdown exposed the delicate balance that studios walk. They want stars who are genuine enough to connect with audiences, but not so candid that they sabotage the production. Zegler's meltdown felt sincere, but that raw honesty clashed catastrophically with Disney's image. In show business, a meltdown of that scale becomes the story itself. The meltdown on The View secured this remake's place in Hollywood's cautionary tales. What should have been a Disney staple turned into an emblem of how badly things can go when corporate strategy, fan nostalgia, and a star's personal convictions collide. Even with all its resources, Disney couldn't rewrite the narrative once it spiraled out of control. AMC's unprecedented decision to pull the film sealed its fate, ensuring that no second wind would come to the rescue. So what happens? Next, some say Disney will think twice before straying too far from the source material in future remakes. Others predict the studio will simply tighten its grip on actors, forcing them to stick to a safe, approved script whenever they appear in public. But one thing's certain, the meltdown that spelled doom for Snow White has left a lasting mark on the industry. For the first time in a long time, a Disney film with the entire weight of the brand behind it collapsed before our very eyes, sending a powerful message that even the biggest names can't ignore mass negative fan reaction. Whether you see it as a moral about respect, a lesson in the perils of live TV, or a testament to the power of public opinion in the digital age, the fiasco will be hard to forget. It reminds studios that authenticity is a double-edged sword, and that nostalgia is not something to mess with. Meanwhile, fans are left wondering, could a future director or star salvage the Snow White legacy, or is it tainted by this debacle? A meltdown like this might linger in Hollywood for years to come. That is where the story ends for now. now. One moment, Snow White was poised to be the talk of the season. The next, it vanished from theaters, overshadowed by an outspoken star and a meltdown that refused to fade from the public memory. It's a stark reminder that even the highest anticipation can go dark if the audience loses faith. And in this case, the meltdown turned what could have been a mild disappointment into an outright cultural phenomenon. The meltdown has set a new precedent in Hollywood, proving that no brand is too big to fail when the fans decide enough is enough.